there hear me in my opera voice? Wonderful. I brought along with me a very scientific instrument called an enthusiasm meter. And on the one side it has a nuclear explosion, on the other side it has deflated New England Patriot. And given the level of enthusiasm for this deal, it's way down there by the balls, all right? It is like a buddy of mine who came back from a car dealership with a clunker and said, man, it was the best deal I could get. I am taking the perspective of opposing this deal from the interests purely of the United States. And I have 4 reasons. The first reason is that the majority of American citizens oppose this deal. The last reliable poll that I saw indicated that only about 20% of Americans supported this deal, whereas the opposition was around 60%. You can question the reliability of polls, but I think the indications about this deal since it was announced have been about the same all the way along. I believe that the primary originating political scientists, Plato and Aristotle, were right about their perceptions about how we construct ourselves societally. Plato thought, as did Aristotle, that all human beings are stupid. They don't understand their own interests. And we have 2 systems. One interest is that you need the philosopher king, according to Plato, who decides what the best interest of the population is. And then you have Aristotle, who thinks that he thought experts were the worst measure of deciding what the interests of the society were. We are in the position where this deal is being pushed through against the will of the people. And I think that's always a dangerous proposition from a general point of view. No matter what you do, whether you are in a dictatorship or whether you are in a democracy, there is a price to pay for pushing through an agreement or a policy which does not have the support of the majority of the people, or at least enough of the people so that it can be substantiated as well. And regardless of whether you're for or against this agreement, the reality is that the administration has not done a very good job of promoting it and of making people understand it as well. One of the things that I find most fascinating, and we saw this yesterday on the west wing of the Capitol steps as well, is that most of the people who have a very strong opinion about the deal don't know what it's about. And that's not a good sign to begin with. And I think this is not just a question of popular understanding of very complicated foreign policy issues. I think it is also a question of leadership and political leadership. My second argument has to do with what I call the obscurity of motivations. One of the debates about Iran since this issue came up 10, 15 years ago is whether or not it really wants a nuclear weapon. And you can argue in either direction as well. Most of the administration supporters of this bill are saying that the deal prevents Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. Because the Iranians themselves and a number of people in senior positions have said that they want to at least keep that option open, if not want to pursue it. So why the hell are our administration people going out and telling something to the American people that they don't agree with, or that they know doesn't make common sense as well? One of the problems with a deal, when you have a problem, countries in other parts of the world don't always do what we in the United States want. So then you have a problem if a country starts down a path where we don't find it in our interest. You can either reject it, you can acquiesce in it, or you can embrace it, all right? And we have gone through all 3 phases with the Iran nuclear problem as well. The reality is that just because you make a deal doesn't mean that it's going to be realized as well. The fact is that once you have a deal, and we've had this before, the Russians are really good at this, by the way, and the North Koreans as well. They'll sign the piece of paper, and bam, next day they will say, it was yesterday's deal. Now we change it. What happens when you have a violation that we determine either by our own verification means or the IAEA has that? This is a very complicated deal with a lot of measures in there about what it's supposed to do and what it's not supposed to do. One of the things the Russians were very adept at, and I would say the Iraqis and probably the Iranians as well, is to take the measures of the deal and then in the verification commitments to try to hide doing that as well. What happens when we decide that they are not abiding by the deal based on anybody's interpretation? The terms of this agreement are so complicated that you can disagree on what the terms are. And we're doing that right now as well. In the public statements that are coming out of Tehran, John Kerry says one thing one day, and then the spokesperson for the Iranian government says, no, that's not true, I have a different interpretation. All right? So how the hell do you determine what constitutes a violation? But the key feature of theirs, if you have a violation of some of the terms regarding plutonium centrifuges and the key features of the elements for a nuclear weapon, you're in the same position as you were without a deal. The deal is irrelevant from that point of view in terms of what the policy reaction of the United States has to be as well. And we can go through a long list of individual elements of the deal, but I think that is not a useful exercise over here today. My point is, just because you have a deal doesn't mean that you have a predictor for the future. All that it means is that you've complicated the future, and I agree with you as well. The horses have left the barn in terms of sanctions, but the reality is that if you have a violation, and if we determine that there is a violation, you're not going to get the sanctions back, but you're still confronted with the idea of what do you do about it? And that is not clear by this deal. In other words, I think the deal doesn't change the fundamental problem about what are Iranian intentions. If they want to make a nuclear bomb, they're going to do it one way or another, and we have to respond to that. And so the question is really, is it against our interests, or do we embrace it? Which brings me to my third point. The fact that we entered into this negotiation for a deal at all. You know, if you have a problem, you don't always have to have a deal as well. If a group of robbers comes to my door, all right, I don't have to go out and make a deal with them in order to allow them to enter into my door. I either resist them, I acquiesce in it, or I let them in, right? But you don't always have to have a deal. I believe this deal changes the strategic landscape in the Middle East in a way that I find threatening to the interests of the United States. There are two major components in the Middle East who are not happy about the deal. One is the traditional ally of Israel, and whether or not you agree with Netanyahu and the political process there, Netanyahu clearly is against it. And the second is Saudi Arabia. Now, I know the King of Saudi Arabia came to the Oval Office and he said, I endorse the deal, but I'm not sure that he was being totally honest when he said that at the time. In any event, the Saudis have gone over the period of this administration, mainly because of the Arab Spring and what happened in Egypt. They have shifted their view of the reliability of the United States as a strategic partner in the Middle East. And at least in terms of this tactical move, I don't think that the Israelis are going to shift their strategic position with the United States, but I believe it threatens us in a way that causes Israel to seek different options about how to deal with this new strategic landscape. This administration has made a point of trying to make agreements and trying to find the friendship factor that you talked about with people who are either traditional rivals or enemies. That's why you have a deal with Iran, you've got the new opening with Cuba, there's been less to do with North Korea, but maybe we'll get there. It worked out really well with Russia and with Putin as well. So there is this ideological fixation that if I can make a deal with a person who doesn't support my interests, that I will then find a new way to a path to friendship. You had used that term before. I don't think Iran wants to be our friend. I don't think Iran wants to be a friend in the area. I think Iran has a very clear vision Iran has a very clear vision of what it wants to do in the Middle East struggle. And we are at least appearing to ally ourselves with Iran, because don't forget who is ISIS's main enemy? It's Iran, right? So just the appearance of the coalition with Iran on the ISIS front creates different kinds of problems. I believe the major challenge that we face in the Middle East is not just reasserting our leadership so that the volatility that exists over there right now can be settled. I think part of that has to do with a lot of events that emerged out of the Arab Spring. But I think one of the major countries that we have not come to a solution with is Turkey. Turkey plays a major role in that region, and I think Turkey is keeping its options open. And Turkey is doing two things at the same time. Number one, it's trying to keep its options open by playing all sides of the issue. But I think number two, it's trying to figure out where the hell is the United States going in all of this as well. And it's not clear to me where the United States is going. And I think this deal makes motivations of US interests much more obscure. So the strategic landscape is, for me, essential in terms of how we pursue our interests in the Middle East. And I don't think we were making it clear to ourselves, or if we even know. I don't know if there is a paper in the White House right now on the national security staff that says our interests in the Middle East in the light of the Iran nuclear deal. I hope there is, but I'm not sure that there is. Finally, the money, all right? Ambassador Hill had spoken about the fact that money and sanctions doesn't really get to the people as well. Well, the $150 billion that's going to be released is going to go straight to the Supreme Leader. And the Supreme Leader decides what he's going to do with that money. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a Supreme Leader to begin with. My only hope is that a lot of this infusion of a lot of money will create even more corruption, so that the privileged classes and the regular people of Iran get even more polarized than they are right now, because they hate each other already. We had talked about this last week. There was a kid who gave a Ferrari to his 18-year-old girlfriend, and she crashed it in the streets of Tehran. And you ask yourself, where the hell did the Ferrari come from to begin with? But why are people having this kind of money? The Iranian Supreme Leader in the past week made two statements that I believe are indicative of where their interests are. Now, granted, there might be a lot of theater involved in it. One of them is with respect to death to America. Let's turn our rhetoric into reality, which I find a very endangering statement. And the second thing is he provided a date for the destruction of Israel as well. I don't know about you, but if somebody threatens to kill me, I take it seriously. And the release of this money is, for me, a very disconcerting moment, because especially if you don't know what the motivations of Iran are, and if you accept what some of the statements that have been made over here, that Iran is not going to turn into our friend, that its opposition to the United States is going to remain strong, regardless of what you think about what its intentions are in the Middle East, just with respect to the United States alone, why am I giving my enemy $150 billion? What's the purpose that could come out of that? How does that support my interests at all? At all. So with that, I will conclude, and I look forward to your barbs or your support. Thank you very much.